Some science fiction films didn't just flop. They burned through budgets, collapsed studios, and ended careers overnight. Executives lost jobs, companies folded, entire genres were declared toxic. And then, years later, something strange happened. These disasters were rediscovered, reclaimed, and reborn as cult classics. These are the sci-fi flops that bankrupted studios and refused to stay dead. Number 10. Southland Tales, 2006. Southland Tales didn't merely fail. It collapsed under its own ambition so completely that it dragged its production company down with it. Richard Kelly followed his Donnie Darko success with a sprawling dystopian sci-fi satire about America collapsing under celebrity culture, surveillance, and endless war. The vision was massive, the execution was chaotic, and the budget spiraled out of control. The film premiered at Cannes in an unfinished state, immediately confusing critics and distributors. Studio confidence evaporated almost overnight. Marketing stalled. Theatrical rollout collapsed. Financial backers pulled out. By the time Southland Tales reached audiences, its production company was effectively financially crippled, unable to recover from the losses. Audiences at the time didn't know what to make of it. The film jumps between timelines, news broadcasts, pop songs, political monologues, and apocalyptic imagery. It felt less like a movie and more like a cultural nervous breakdown. Box office returns were disastrous, and Richard Kelly's Hollywood momentum never recovered. But time changed the conversation. What once felt incoherent now feels disturbingly prophetic. Reality TV dominance, algorithm-driven culture, performative politics, media saturation as social collapse. Number 9. Dune, 1984. David Lynch's Dune didn't just disappoint audiences. It financially crippled the Dino De Laurentiis company's science fiction ambitions and permanently reshaped how studios approached large-scale sci-fi adaptations. The project was enormous, elaborate sets, extensive visual effects, dense world-building, and a budget that ballooned beyond what the market could safely absorb. The studio expected a Star Wars-level phenomenon. What they got was a deeply strange, studio-compromised vision that satisfied almost no one. Lynch lost creative control during editing. The narrative was chopped down. Voiceover explanations were added. Characters blurred together. And audiences were left confused rather than transported. The box office failure hit hard. De Laurentiis had invested heavily in Dune as a franchise starter. Instead, the losses forced the company to retreat from high-risk genre epics, effectively ending its reign as a sci-fi powerhouse. For years, Dune was treated as a cautionary tale. Too weird? Too expensive? Too dense? But cult appreciation slowly grew. Fans began to recognize the craftsmanship buried under the compromises. The Baroque production design, the unsettling score, the nightmarish imagery that felt uniquely Lynchian despite studio interference. Number 8. The Black Hole, 1979. The Black Hole was Disney's first attempt to enter serious science fiction, and it nearly derailed the studio's live-action future. Coming off the success of Star Wars, Disney wanted to prove it could compete in darker territory. The result was a grim space epic filled with existential dread, religious imagery, and surprisingly bleak themes. The budget soared. Visual effects were cutting edge for the time. Marketing promised a bold new Disney era, but audiences weren't ready for a Disney film that flirted with nihilism and cosmic horror. Families stayed away, sci-fi fans were uncertain, box office returns were disappointing at best. Internally, the film caused panic. Executives questioned whether Disney should ever attempt adult-leaning genre films again. The financial underperformance nearly shut down future live-action experimentation. For a moment, Disney seemed poised to retreat back into safe animation. And yet, the Black Hole refused to vanish. Late-night TV broadcasts and home video turned it into a cult favorite. Viewers rediscovered its eerie tone, haunting music, and unsettling ending. What once felt like a branding mistake now feels like a rare moment when Disney stared into the void and didn't blink. Number 7. Zardoz, 1974. Zardoz is the kind of science fiction failure that doesn't just lose money, it shatters trust. Coming off the massive success of Deliverance, director John Boorman was given near-total creative freedom. What he delivered was a surreal dystopian fever dream about immortality, population control, and the decay of intellectual elites. The studio expected something bold but coherent. What they got was something audiences openly laughed at. The production was expensive. The concept was aggressively abstract. Marketing had no idea how to sell it. And when Zardoz hit theaters, the response was brutal. Box office returns were weak, critical reaction was savage, and the film's losses ended Boorman's blank check era overnight. Studios quietly decided they would never again fund something this strange without heavy oversight. At the time, Zardoz was treated as a punchline. Sean Connery's costume overshadowed everything. The philosophical ambition was dismissed as pretentious nonsense, and the financial disappointment made it radioactive within the industry. But cult cinema thrives on what mainstream culture rejects. Over time, viewers began to notice that Zardoz wasn't stupid. It was reckless. Number 6. Solaris, 1972. Solaris didn't bankrupt a studio in the traditional sense, but it financially poisoned international confidence in philosophical science fiction. Andrei Tarkovsky's adaptation of Stanisław Lem's novel was slow, meditative, and deliberately resistant to spectacle. It cost far more than expected and returned far less than hoped. Soviet studios initially believed Solaris could compete internationally with Western sci-fi successes. Instead, distributors struggled to market it. Audiences expecting thrills were confronted with grief, memory, and guilt. Box office returns outside the USSR were weak. Western financiers quietly backed away from similar projects. From a business perspective, Solaris sent a clear message. Serious science fiction doesn't sell. That belief lingered for years, influencing what studios were willing to fund. Tarkovsky paid the price professionally. His relationship with the Soviet film system deteriorated, limiting future opportunities. But artistically, Solaris never disappeared. Critics revisited it. Filmmakers referenced it. Viewers grew into it. The film's central idea, that space exploration forces humanity to confront itself rather than the unknown, aged extraordinarily well. Today, Solaris is considered one of the most profound science fiction films ever made. Its failure wasn't creative. It was commercial timing. Number 5. Silent Running, 1972. Silent Running didn't destroy Universal Pictures, but it ended an entire approach to studio science fiction. The film was an ecological parable disguised as a space drama. It was quiet, emotional, anti-spectacle, and deeply personal. Universal financed it, hoping to tap into the growing sci-fi market. Instead, it underperformed badly. The box office returns were disappointing enough that executives lost confidence in small-scale, idea-driven sci-fi. The message was clear. Audiences wanted action, not introspection. As a result, Universal pivoted sharply away from projects like Silent Running, reshaping the genre's future. For director Douglas Trumbull, the impact was severe. Despite groundbreaking visual effects and a powerful central performance, Silent Running stalled his career. The industry decided the film proved that thoughtful science fiction wasn't financially viable. Then time intervened. Environmental collapse became real. Loneliness became relatable. The film's sadness stopped feeling naive and started feeling honest. A home video transformed Silent Running into a cult favorite. Viewers connected with its melancholy tone and quiet moral urgency. Today, it's remembered not as a failure, but as a warning delivered too early. A financial disappointment that changed the genre by being ignored. Number 4. Things to Come, 1936. Things to Come was not just a box office disappointment, it was a financial catastrophe that nearly wiped out an entire production company. Produced by Alexander Korda's London Films and written by H.G. Wells himself, the movie attempted something unheard of at the time, a sweeping science fiction epic that spanned decades of future history. The ambition was staggering, the cost was enormous, and the audience response was devastating. The film envisioned world war, global collapse, technocratic rule, and humanity rebuilding civilization through science. It was cold, intellectual, and unapologetically didactic. Korda believed he was producing the future of cinema. Instead, he produced a film that audiences found distant, confusing, and emotionally inaccessible. Financially, the losses were severe enough to cripple London Films. Planned follow-ups vanished. Expansion halted. Korda was forced to retreat to safer productions just to keep the company alive. The industry quietly concluded that science fiction was too risky, too expensive, and too strange for mass audiences. For decades, Things to Come was treated as a noble failure, a curiosity, a warning. But time reversed its reputation. As the 20th century unfolded, nearly every prediction the film made felt uncomfortably plausible. Endless war, technological dependence. Number 3. The Thief of Baghdad, 1940. The Thief of Baghdad nearly destroyed Alexander Korda's production empire a second time. But this time, the damage was almost fatal. The film was envisioned as a dazzling fantasy spectacle packed with groundbreaking effects, exotic worlds, and mythic storytelling. It succeeded artistically. Financially, it nearly collapsed everything behind it. Production was plagued by war, relocations, reshoots, and ballooning costs. What began as an ambitious fantasy became a logistical nightmare. Budgets spiraled, delays mounted. By the time the film reached audiences, Korda's finances were already stretched to the breaking point. Although the film eventually earned admiration, the initial returns were nowhere near enough to justify the investment. The losses crippled Korda's ability to fund large-scale productions going forward. His studio survived, but its golden age effectively ended. What saved The Thief of Baghdad was longevity. Its visual imagination aged beautifully. Its effects inspired generations of filmmakers. Its dreamlike logic felt closer to science fantasy than fairy tale. Over time, it became a cornerstone of genre history. Today, it's remembered not as a failure, but as a film that cost too much for its own era to support. A masterpiece that nearly took its studio down with it. Number 2. Metropolis, 1927. Metropolis didn't just flop. It nearly destroyed the German film industry's greatest studio. Produced by UFA at a cost so enormous it became legendary, Metropolis was one of the most expensive films ever made at the time. So director Fritz Lang built massive futuristic cityscapes, employed thousands of extras, and pushed special effects far beyond what silent cinema had ever attempted. The ambition was unprecedented, so was the financial risk. When the film premiered, audiences were overwhelmed rather than entertained. Distributors demanded drastic cuts. International versions butchered the narrative. Box office returns collapsed. UFA had borrowed heavily to finance the film, and when the revenue failed to materialize, the studio was thrown into financial freefall. The damage went far beyond a single loss. UFA was forced into a bailout that placed it under political and corporate control. Creative freedom vanished. The studio's artistic golden age ended almost overnight. Metropolis became shorthand for everything executives feared about ambitious cinema. Too expensive, too intellectual, too dangerous. And yet the film refused to die. Fragmented prints survived. Restorations followed. New footage was discovered decades later. As the film was gradually reconstructed, its brilliance became undeniable. Number 1. Heaven's Gate, 1980. Heaven's Gate didn't just bankrupt a movie, it killed a studio system. United Artists had built its reputation on giving filmmakers freedom. Michael Cimino was handed total creative control after The Deer Hunter. What followed was an unchecked production nightmare. Endless takes, rebuilt sets, ballooning schedules. Costs spiraled from millions into catastrophe. When the film premiered, it was unfinished and incomprehensible. Critics savaged it. The audiences stayed away. United Artists panicked, pulled the film, recut it, and re-released it. But the damage was already done. The losses were catastrophic. United Artists was absorbed by MGM, losing its independence entirely. Executive careers ended. Director-driven cinema was declared dead. Hollywood entered an era of corporate control and franchise safety. Although not traditionally labeled science fiction, Heaven's Gate represents speculative cinema in its most dangerous form, a reimagined past so expansive it functioned like an alternate reality. Its collapse reshaped Hollywood economics more than any genre film before or since. Decades later, the film was restored and reevaluated. Critics reversed course. Viewers saw a tragic, beautiful epic buried under its own excess. But the reckoning came too late. Heaven's Gate didn't become a cult classic quietly. It became one after the industry buried the philosophy that created it. These films didn't just lose money, they rewrote the rules of Hollywood survival. Studios collapsed. Creative freedom vanished. And yet, time resurrected what accountants buried. Cult classics aren't born from success. They're born from risk, failure, and ideas too dangerous for their moment.